live on YouTube.
And we're on our site, we can start.
All righty, good morning, everyone. And first off, I want to start by thanking all of our district managers and staff who are on this Zoom this morning. This morning, we are pleased to be joined by the Department of Veteran Affairs and the City of New York Department of Sanitation, a very popular agency. Both are popular, but sanitation right now. The Cabinet will first receive a presentation from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Since 1949, the month of May has been recognized as Mental Health Awareness Month. Over the years, mental health issues have been overlooked and pushed aside throughout many communities, specifically communities of color. During this pandemic, we got a chance to deeply understand how someone's mental health can affect their well-being. Veterans are at the top of the list of individuals who deal with mental health issues and suicidal thoughts. This morning, we are pleased to be joined by Community Engagement and Partnerships Coordinator Sebastian Shaw. Sebastian has been working with the New York City Veterans Department as a social worker with the VA for over 7 years. While working for the Manhattan campus, Sebastian builds partnerships with key stakeholders to implement macro-level suicide prevention efforts. Today's presentation will be a brief overview of the New York Harbor's Community Suicide Prevention Program. It will also include ways to get involved and help reduce suicide rates. With that being said, I would like to welcome Sebastian to begin his presentation.
All right, thank you. And thanks for inviting me here to do this presentation this morning. I am going to share my screen if that's okay. And can everyone see the slides? Beautiful. All right, so as it was said, my name is Sebastian Shaw. I'm the Community Engagement and Partnerships Coordinator for the New York Harbor VA. I do have a counterpart in Brooklyn and as well as in the Bronx, so we're well represented. My contact info is there, and I will share that again as we go through. I'm going to try to move through some of these slides a little quickly to be respectful of time. If at any point somebody has a question or concern, just feel free to speak up. So just a little bit of facts about veterans in our community. Generally speaking, nationally, it's about 7% of the total population has some service in the armed forces. And New York City is home to about 138,000 veterans. You see, I put a question mark after that line. That number is pretty accurate. The question is, how are we identifying veterans? So there's a lot of different ways that we can kind of call that number up. We can say who's eligible for VA services, who's served at all in the armed services, who's deployed. As you'll see, this is kind of a big question that we have is who's identifying as a veteran. And so part of suicide prevention is looking at that question specifically. And another thing to keep in mind is that almost 70% of veterans under 65 have private health insurance. We know that a good amount of veterans who are eligible for VA care don't receive their care through the VA. So they're out in the community getting their health care from private providers, from maybe city hospitals. But we're only kind of tracking about a third of folks who we know are eligible for VA care. So in Queens specifically, we have a high number of veterans. New York State is the 5th highest veteran population of all the states, and Queens has the 4th highest veteran population of all the counties in New York State. Something to keep in mind is that we have a high population but a low rate. So sometimes you might see things that look like the number of veterans in Queens is not so high, when in fact it's simply the rate, it's simply the percentage of the population, when in fact we do have a high population of veterans. We don't have to get too into this slide, one of the things that I think is interesting is that in Queens, we actually have a slightly higher number of male veterans aged 17 to 44 than other areas. And that is a higher risk age range for suicide, especially the younger ages. All right, so that was a very brief little bit about the veterans that we serve in Queens. I want to talk a little bit about suicide. Suicide is a national public health issue. It is not a veteran-specific issue. If you're not aware of this, it is a national problem that has been on the rise for the last several decades. And it was, prior to COVID, it was the 10th leading cause of death per the CDC. With COVID, that got pushed back to 11th or 12th. I would expect that as COVID deaths decline or continue to decline, that we'll see suicide back to that, around that number 10. It's about 45,000 deaths per year in the United States. And as of right now, we haven't seen like a spike due to COVID, but in the past, when we've had sort of national crises, the spike in suicides and adverse events comes later. So if that trend holds true, we'll see the suicide rates go up in the years following COVID. Second leading cause of death in the US for people aged 18 to 34. It's a problem on the rise for teenagers. And sorry about that. Veterans make up less than 8% of the population, but about 14% of all deaths by suicide in the United States. Veterans are about 1.5 times higher risk for suicide than the general population. And I just want to again stress that suicide isn't a veteran-specific problem. It's a problem that disproportionately affects veterans. So all the interventions that we employ at the VA and the community partnerships that we form, while we specifically target service members, veterans, and their families, these have a kind of a universal impact. Not advancing here, there we go. Also want to point out that suicide is a complex issue and there's no single cause. So it's not such that somebody with untreated depression is naturally going to progress towards suicide, or that somebody with no mental health diagnoses will never have an impulse to take self-harm actions or to complete suicide. It is a combination of a lot of different factors, as it says, individual, community, and societal levels. And we need to maximize protective factors at all levels and minimize risk factors. And I just want to put this in right in the middle. Suicide is preventable. Sometimes when we talk about these things, it can start to seem like doom and gloom. The last numbers that came out specific to veterans did show a decline in veteran suicide, a small blip of a few percent points, but a decline nonetheless for the first time in many years. That data was from 2019. It takes a few years for the veteran data to be processed. You have a combination of determining who is veterans and a combination of determining if a death was actually suicide. And those two factors make the statistics of determining veteran suicide take a little longer than other causes of death. So, but that is to say that the last accurate data that we have shows a decline. So something is working, and VA is expanding our efforts. We have had about a 15-year mandate of having suicide prevention at the VA hospitals. So every VA hospital has a suicide prevention coordinator, and the larger sites have teams. And New York Harbor is no different. We have suicide prevention coordinators at the Manhattan VA, the Brooklyn VA, We now have a presence at the Staten Island Clinic and in the Bronx and in St. Albans in Queens, of course. What we're doing differently now, as of last summer, is putting out this public health approach, which is what I'm doing. We are also expanding the existing clinical services. We've brought on more members onto the team. And we're engaging stakeholders to form coalitions. We're looking to join existing coalitions, with those coalitions adopting a suicide prevention priority area or goal, providing education on these suicide prevention topics, and engaging in any kind of community events and outreach that we can manage. To give you an example of some of the things that we've been working on since last summer, we're looking at partnerships with the New York City libraries, all three systems. I'm actually doing a presentation for the Queens Public Library tonight virtually. We are connecting with the hospitals and other healthcare providers, the Staten Island SIPs and America RSVP. We have geographically community-based work in Rockaway and with the Bronx Community Board 7. We're forming coalitions with homeless services, higher education, department, not just Department of Corrections, but anybody working in corrections. We're looking at adaptive sports, which is an area that we might find veterans engaging with, and the LGBTQ plus community. So when we talk about coalitions, we do want to look at geographic areas where we know there are veterans, but we're also looking at other things that might kind of tie the veteran community in, areas where we can engage in some of our priority areas. The first one, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is identifying service members, veterans, and their families, and screening for suicide risk. We know that there's veterans out there who aren't coming to VA. We know that there's folks who have served who don't identify as veterans. They might be eligible for benefits. At the very least, we want to make sure that with our clinical expertise in the VA, that we're making that available to community partners who are working with veterans who could benefit from that. Number two, we want to improve connectedness and care transitions. Care transitions is a big one where we see people who might slip through the cracks, so to speak. For example, going from the service to higher education, maybe utilizing GI Bill, trying to get that college degree, and it's a big transition, and it's a high risk area. That's why, as you saw in one of the previous slides, we started looking at higher education. Another high risk area transition perhaps is from service to retirement or from career to retirement, and improving connectedness. Some of the work that we're doing is really just around building strong bonds to make sure that our community partners have access to VA, and that we're all remaining connected as a community in service of suicide prevention. And lastly, our priority area is increasing lethal means safety and safety planning. I won't get into it too much, but safety planning is a clinical intervention for when people have thoughts of suicide. And lethal means safety is reducing access to anything that can be used for self-harm. And there's a myriad of ways that we do that, but we know that suicide is an impulsive act most often. So most people who have engaged in some suicidal behavior report that the time frame from when they had that thought to when they acted was very, very brief. So when we talk about lethal means, we're talking about expanding that time. And that might mean things like reducing access to firearms, reducing access to medication, reducing access to environmental hazards. So those are the three priority areas that when I talk about partnering, engaging with coalitions, we're looking to to adopt at least one of those goals. All right. So if you're thinking, how can you get involved with suicide prevention? How can you get involved with veteran suicide prevention? Absolutely, you can contact me. My email is up again. My phone number is up again. I'm happy to talk more. If you have, if you're connected with a group, if your community board might have some interest, if you want to pass along my information to anybody who might be interested, individuals or groups, please do so. If you want to contact me because you think you might want to join one of the coalitions that I listed or one of the areas that I listed earlier, reach out, let me know. As I mentioned, forming a coalition yourself. And then lastly, if nothing else, we want to talk about suicide. We want to reduce the stigma. So at the very least, mention that you had a presentation on suicide prevention today, say the words, and get people talking, because we do have a tendency to not even say suicide or definitely not talk about it in our culture, in our society. And then lastly, if you are in crisis right now, if you're having real thoughts of suicide, you can always call the Veterans Crisis Line, 800-273-8255. And it actually prompts you, this is a national crisis line, but if you're a veteran, it'll prompt you to press 1, at which point it would route you to a veteran-specific call center. But if at this point you're having thoughts of suicide, or at any point, you can call this number. It's a really great resource. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to do my best to answer that.
So you said suicide rates have dropped. That that data was that pre-COVID or that pre-COVID?
Yes,
what
sir.
are you seeing during the pandemic?
So I can't speak for during the pandemic. As I said, our numbers take a while. With suicide, there's a lot of cases where we're not sure if it's an overdose. We're not sure if it's an intentional death. Sometimes people are found alone. So the data itself takes a lot of processing. And then for us, so for just national numbers, they're usually about a year behind, but for the VA, it's usually a couple of years, because we have to layer on top of that, figuring out for sure if this person was a veteran, because a lot of times that's not reported on a death certificate. So our numbers take a little while. So unfortunately, I don't want to speak about during COVID, because I might just be giving inaccurate information.
So just go through, what is your hotline? Are you seeing more calls coming to the hotline? Was there, do you track the data that way? Is it too hard to track it immediately?
Yeah, so I'm not with the hotline. The hotline is a separate
separate, okay.
Separate service. It's a good thing to mention, though. The hotline, how it works is it goes to a call center. So if anybody listening now is having thoughts about calling that hotline, it goes to a call center, and the callers are given a choice if they want a referral to the VA, right? So they can say, no, thanks, I don't want anybody else involved in this. It's just something I want to talk about. Or they can say, yeah, please have someone from the VA call me. And if they agree to the consult, then somebody from our team in suicide prevention reaches out within 24 hours to connect them to services. But it is separate from us as an entity.
And I saw that you mentioned you work with the corrections department, and I was at Rikers Island just a few weeks ago touring, and actually they had a veterans unit. So I was interested in knowing what's the coordination there. I got to speak to a few of the veterans that are detained there, and just wanted to know how do you work in concert with the corrections department, being that we do have a separate unit for veterans in there.
Yeah, so some of the things that we've been talking about with the folks on that coalition is, as I mentioned, screening for veterans. So they have kind of a pretty good system as far as making sure that there's posters up, there's things available. So if someone is on Rikers and they're a veteran, they can kind of be channeled to the veterans unit. They also have a sort of a peer support program for suicide prevention. So we're talking about providing some training to make sure that those peers are trained up on signs for suicide and what to do. Because it's Rikers, we have to modify the training a little bit because there's limitations to what they'd be able to do. They don't just have access to everything like unincarcerated folks would. But that's some of the work we're doing. And with corrections, as I mentioned, what is really important is also that care connectedness, right? So it's making sure that we have somebody on the calls from Rikers, but also somebody from the hospitals, right? And a lot of the folks, they get discharged, they get released, and they still need the ongoing care. So improving that care connectedness is also something that's important on those calls.
I'm just happy to hear you talk about training, because that's something we heard over and over again from them, the need to make sure that there's more training. And I was really impressed with some of the things they were doing while they are detained. And another issue that came up a lot about was housing. And so I wanted to speak. So how do you work? Because I know mental health has a lot to do with supportive housing, and sort of want to know how you work collectively to ensure that they're connected to housing opportunities. If not, and that may not be your department, but I know that that's a major factor in terms of, treatment, especially support, getting the wraparound services. So I wanted to just know, I saw you had something on Rockaway Peninsula. Was that related to vet housing?
So that's not specific to housing. And actually my colleague, Allison out in Brooklyn, she covers Rockaway Peninsula. So she could speak more to specifically what she's doing out there with regard to suicide prevention. Just to clarify, when you mentioned housing, were you speaking about Rikers or VA?
Oh, just in general. In general.
Yes. So the VA has pretty robust housing program in partnership with HUD, where homeless veterans can get a Section 8 voucher. They get supported throughout the process of finding housing and maintaining it. With what I'm doing in my role, because I'm sort of outward facing from the VA, I'm in contact with my colleagues in those programs. I'm also really looking at service providers who aren't within the VA. So things like Jericho Project, Samaritan Village, getting some of those folks to the table to make sure that they, again, have the access to the training and the resources, and also have the connectedness to the VA, so that we keep those lines of communication open. I want to speak also, since you mentioned training. Training is the hot item, and we're always being called on to provide some trainings and presentations, and we're happy to do that. One thing about trainings, though, is that I really like to have a few meetings and get a sense of what the needs are, rather than kind of come in and just do blanket trainings. A perfect example is the folks in corrections, and just really wanting to know what their needs are before we just try to go in and give a standardized training. But yeah, training is a big one across the board, and a lot of folks are interested in it, and we're happy to provide that.
There seems to be a disconnect. Then my last question, just with younger veterans. So I want to know, how is that strategy working out? Because they seem to probably be less engaged with some of the organizations out there, and we have a myriad of organizations in Queens. And most times when we go to these events, or we visit veteran organizations, we often find that much older folks who've been around, who know how to work the system, and rightfully so, have done their time and are more knowledgeable and wise on what's available to them. So just want to know, how does your strategy work in sort of reaching younger vets?
Great question. Yeah, and I think we know, I can speak for myself, that when I was 18, I wasn't going to the primary care doctor every year, right? So we know that folks, if they come out of service at 21, 22, 23, they're most likely, their first priority isn't going to be coming to the VA frequently. So that really speaks to some of these other areas that we're looking at. And it's why I'm also trying not to just go geographically, like community by community, but to look at some of these other areas, like LGBTQ communities. Where are folks who identify as LGBTQ going, and partnering with those places to implement some screening for veteran status as well. Looking at adaptive sports. We have all these rock climbing gyms. We have, sailing programs for veterans. Things that sometimes somebody who's 25 might say, oh, I can go climbing, at the cliffs in Long Island City at a discount because I'm a veteran. Okay, so do we have some posters up at the cliffs, or do the people at the cliffs have some knowledge of how they can access us? That's what I'm thinking about and working on. As I said, we've started doing this in July of last year, so I don't have specifics of what's worked for us so far. But that's what we're looking at, and that's why we're not just looking at neighborhood by neighborhood or just the American Legion halls, but kind of expanding our thinking to where folks might be.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. I'm going to go to Florence and then Marie for questions.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Borough President. Hello, Sebastian. My district, I cover Astoria, Long Island City, where the cliffs are, as a matter of fact. And we have veterans housing at Marine Terrace on 20th Avenue. Do you ever reach out there? Because the portion of veterans who are there were formerly homeless veterans. Have you gone there? Have you had an opportunity to sit down with the people there and discuss, just give them an overview of the services you provide and the prevention that you have?
No, I wasn't familiar with that site. I'm familiar with where it is. It's not too far from my home as well. I would love to have the opportunity if you could share a contact person, or
I'll send it to you in private chat. Please feel free to get my information from the Borough President's office.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Great, Marie, and then Frank.
Thank you, Borough President, for having this very important topic today. For Mr. Shaw, let's say that I'm a veteran and I'm 30 years old and I'm leaving the service. Is there some sort of an exit, let's say, interview where you talk about all the different programs and things that are available to me as a veteran? And what kind of follow-ups are there to make sure that I am adjusting properly to society and that I'm getting all the support that I would need as a veteran after giving so much of my life for my country?
That's a great question. So I can't speak to the Department of Defense side. My understanding is that when service members exit, they're given like a exit classes. Anecdotally, just from what I've heard from folks that I've worked with, people take those classes at a range of seriousness. Some people focus on them and they really pay attention, and other folks kind of sign and they're ready to go on with their life. From the VA side of it, we do have for folks who, if you're exiting now at age 30, they do have a specific, they just changed the name of it. It used to be called the OAF clinic, but it's expanded beyond those operations. So there is a department at VA specific to people who are just coming out of service now, who served in one of the recent operations. And the question of like, how do we stay in contact with people really ranges depending on what they're coming to VA services for. And how do we keep people engaged? From a mental health standpoint, I just want to mention also that if someone's coming for primary care, our primary care clinic does have a mental health clinic attached to it. So we have our big mental health clinic, and then we have primary care has mental health attached to it. So if someone's coming to us, as I mentioned, just for that annual checkup, right, or that biannual checkup, and they're starting to feel, they mentioned that they're starting to feel some anxiety or some depression, there's a faster access to mental health through there. I don't know if that specifically speaks to your question, but I think as far as how, how we kind of keep in contact with people, it really varies depending on what they're coming to us for and what the clinical need is.
So as they leave, I would assume that the Veterans Affairs will be, will have maybe a list or know who is actually leaving the service so that you can invite them, to use your services or something like that, and not just leave it to them to just go find you. I'm hoping that the Veterans Affairs, has their contact, I have these 10 people leaving today. How do I reach out to them and give them services? With the regular checkups, actually something very different from the last time I went for my checkup as my primary doctor. They had certain questions to kind of check on your mental status and how you're feeling today and things like that. So I hope that is also included for our veterans. It was a first for me, and I really thought that was a real good thing because we don't usually do the mental checkups. And I think it's not just, just for everybody as a whole. And I hope that we certainly do that for our veterans, who have given so much to us.
Absolutely. I think that, thank you so much for the questions and for bringing that up. I think that what you're seeing is also the trend of saying we need to ask people about mental health in multiple settings, right? Not just people who go to a therapist or a psychiatrist. We absolutely do screen at multiple places. We screen specifically for suicide in multiple clinics, and we screen for mental health absolutely in primary care. Without a doubt. I also want to point out to mention we have an outreach coordinator who I think would be better able to answer your question about that gap between service and VA and what is VA doing to make sure that there's a minimal gap there. So I don't want to speak too much about it, but if you are interested further, just send me your info and I'll connect you via email. And I'm sure that he will be able to articulate much more about what we're doing.
Great, thank you.
Frank, then Gary.
Good morning. Thank you, Sebastian. This is so needed. This information, it's very informative. I really do appreciate it. One way of getting the word out, I think one of my colleagues mentioned it a little while ago. I have a very active American Legion Hall, which literally a couple of years ago was going out of business right here on Metropolitan Avenue in Forest Hills, literally going out. They owed all kinds of tax dollars, etc. But with the help of some electeds and by getting the gentleman who took over became, I spoken to him, he became a member of my board. Literally every month he talks about what's going on over at the American Legion Hall. And he reaches out to everybody. He's actually reached out to the merchants. And that's just as an FYI to everybody. We have one of the larger, not the largest Veterans Day parade, but after 2.5 years of not having anything, we're going to have one hell of a parade down Metropolitan Avenue, going all the way down to celebrate the Civil War patriots and the American Revolution guys who passed away and buried in this neighborhood not too far from here. So I just wanted to share that with you. But I also was wondering, maybe the borough president, I know there was an office over in Borough Hall at one point for veterans. And I thought maybe you guys were putting it.
It's open.
I'm sorry?
It's open. We opened
great.
it last week. Yeah, we announced it last week. So we're open again.
Super. I thought I saw that, and I'll spread that out at my community board meeting tomorrow night to let it, again, to blast that out. I think the guys, Sebastian, I'm sure you know this, the borough president certainly knows this. We have an enormous amount of veterans that live in the borough. And there has been a need for years and years and years. There's always a reach out, but never enough. And I'm sure my colleague James McClellan over at 9 would certainly back me up on that. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you, Borough President, for reopening that. We really needed that.
And staff, I think we may have some materials ready, but I know we just formally announced it last week, so we can make sure if there are flyers or informational flyers that
we can get
for staff on. Let's make sure we get it to Frank so that he can get the word out.
Yeah, we can get that out to over. Thank you.
Yep. All right, no problem. All right, we'll go to Gary.
Yeah, first, thank you, Sebastian, and thanks, Borough President, for bringing this matter to our focus. too often for me, issues I'm dealing with are not that they're not important, are crime and traffic problems and sanitation, all of that. And I think that we don't pay attention to the fact that a lot of our veterans suffered from PTSD and other trauma, and I don't think are getting enough respect, generally speaking, from the public. We've had a Veterans Day parade on Metropolitan Avenue in our district, and it's not well attended whatsoever. But the focus of this is about mental health. And when we've had our mental health sessions or our health department borough consultations, one of the questions that we put forth to the health department is, there's a lot of talk about, people need to get mental health assistance, and a large percentage of the population, maybe it's 20 or 30%, suffers from some sort of depression every year. And with veterans who have been in wartime situations, it's a lot worse, and the struggles with that. So, Sebastian, a straight answer we don't get from the health department, and I think something that's very glossed over, is that we as a society, in my opinion, do not have nearly the mental health services that we need for the people that need mental health services, and what is going to be done in order to train more people to and promote going into that profession.
Yeah, that is the question. I don't have an answer. I think that that's the question, right? Is how do we get care to everybody who needs it? And the only thing that I can say to answer that with any specificity is that right now it takes all of us talking about, sharing, and being in contact with one another about mental health, so that the folks who need care will reach out and access it. And that they know they can talk about it, because while we know that so many people need care, we also know that a lot of people just aren't reaching out, aren't asking for help. And I believe that talking about it and being open about these things in and of itself will take some of the burden. Yeah, don't have a specific answer to you, but the work that we're doing with connecting with communities and with stakeholders like yourselves, I believe is one piece of that puzzle.
Stigma, right? For a long time, mental health had a stigma attached to it, and I am proud to see more people, especially in the younger generation, actually talking about it. The tennis player who, forgetting her name, from Queens. How did I forget her name? Somebody from Southeast Queens. And she was actually, I think, in the New York Times yesterday, just talking about, or the Daily News, talking about the need for that break, and how she had to leave the U.S. Open, I believe it was, for a second.
Naomi Osaka?
There you go. Come on, I'm messing up this morning. I need another cup of coffee. But she was an important voice, and it actually opened up a lot of folks talking about mental health, and we need to keep doing that. James.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. Thank you, Sebastian. Quick question. How are the proposed closing of 2 facilities, VA facilities in Manhattan and Brooklyn, going to impact your ability to deliver services to veterans? Has that been quantified yet?
Great question. Great question.
Yeah, good question. It hasn't been quantified yet. I'm sure you know that they have a year to review the recommendations, and then I think we'll have a little bit more clarity on what's going to happen. But I have no idea of how it's going to be quantified beyond what's already written up in that recommendation.
And one last thing, we're having a problem burying indigent vets. They're getting buried in Potter's Field with unmarked graves. So I just want to put that on the borough president's radar screen. Thank you. Go Army.
Yeah, and there is, so VA is split into three units. There's the Veterans Health Administration, there's the Benefits Administration, and then there's cemeteries and burials. So just to be aware that there is a agency, and if you need a contact person, I can work on getting you someone from Veterans. And I just want to mention, Frank, I think we've actually been to, is that post 1427 that you're talking about? Yeah, my colleague Kate was out there in November, I believe, for a presentation. So yeah, they're great.
All righty, gonna go. Gary, you have another question? Gary, then Florence.
Thought I lowered my hand.
Okay, sorry. All right, Florence.
I want to piggyback on what James said with the veterans being buried at Potter's Field. So if a veteran is homeless or identified and they pass away, if the agency knows that their veteran services will be provided for that veteran to bury them, there is some place for them to be taken properly.
That's too far from what I do with suicide prevention. I can't speak to it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
All right.
Thank you.
Problem is, Florence, there is no good mechanism to identify them. Sometimes the VA will deny a claim, and we're having a hard time for funeral homes to participate because they're putting in an inordinate amount of paperwork in and not being reimbursed in a timely manner. So we're having a real big problem.
This is heartbreaking. We should bring this out to the open more, make more people aware of that fact.
And actually, there was a lot of work done during my time at the city council to actually highlight this issue too, especially during COVID when people were just being dumped at Potter's Field with no identification and no notification of families. So the city needs to do better. And I agree, this is something we need to really, for people who especially serve this country, there should be zero vets homelessness, which the city claims there's no veteran homelessness. Anyway, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And part of what we're seeing on the streets, not to say that people attacking people are veterans, but there's definitely years of inaction, years of disinvestment in many of these communities that have certainly caused what we see on these streets now. It just doesn't happen overnight. The pandemic just exacerbated many of the issues around mental health. So a lot of work that needs to continuously be done around this. So I want to thank you, Sebastian. Marie, you got one last question?
Yes. I understand what James said about the paperwork once the veteran dies. The thing is, we know that we're all going to die someday. So why wait until the veteran dies for the paperwork to be done? Maybe what should be in place is already have something where, like if you purchase a plot or something beforehand, you already have things in place. So for each veteran, as they leave, they should have that benefit in some form so that wherever they are, whatever happens to them, they already have the documents and everything already in place so that the family or, do not have to go through this hurdle of trying to figure out how to bury that person, or even, wherever they go, it goes with them. They don't have to wait until they die for them to just do the paperwork. Those benefits should be already done. All the paperwork, everything should have been in place. So the only thing you need to do is show up to any funeral home, and there's an X amount of money for that funeral, and it's already done. So I think that we are not doing we're doing a disservice for our veterans that we should hold in such high esteem. And judging by what they go through, it doesn't seem that we hold them in high esteem. And I think the having beautiful honors to them, have them march and have music and all of that. It's all nice. The most important thing is the actual benefit, like the healthcare, making sure that they have proper housing, homeless prevention, and most especially, once they pass away, that, we honor them. That's how we show that we value them. We're not supposed to just show that we value them in words. We have to show that we value them in deed. So one of the deed would be to make sure that as they leave, they have some sort of a voucher, something that that follows them. So once they passed away, there's no time for paperwork, huge paperwork. It's already there for them. Unfortunately, as a district manager, I don't have the means to make that happen, but maybe our elected officials at the congressional level can work to do something better for them. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to chime in and just to mention that, I love this idea. I think that one of the issues is getting back to that screening, and sometimes people will leave the service, say they left the service in 1983, and they've had some really rough years between then and now, and they're in a shelter or a city hospital. They might not even identify as a veteran anymore. Folks who had challenging experiences in the service, maybe they don't have an honorable discharge. They don't know that they can work to get that discharge upgraded. And so the first step, in my opinion, is to screen for service. And I know I'm over time, I'm going on, but just asking somebody if they're a veteran, we know that that's not the best way to do it. There's other ways to frame that question around service to know if somebody served, and then to start the process to see if they're eligible or how they can become eligible for those benefits. So it's really important that we all engage in this work. I just want to thank you all, Borough President. I'm going to look through the chat for contact info, and I look forward to continuing to be in contact with you.
Ready. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for this helpful information, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you for being here this morning. All right, now going to move on to our second presentation today. We will receive a presentation from the New York City Department of Sanitation. Representing DSNY this morning is Nicholas. I don't even know how to say your last name. Sakaro? I've never even said your last name. Did I get it right?
Chikara.
I got it. I just know you as Nick all of these years. I go back with Nick for a long time. Nicholas serves as the Assistant Director of the Bureau of Community Affairs. Nick has been with the department for 7 years, initially as a Queens liaison. I think we worked together when you were a staffer, when I was a staffer as well, and now an Assistant Director. So we both moved up somewhat. He will discuss with us the new requirement for owners and developers of new large residential buildings to submit a waste management plan. And I'm sure he's going to field a million questions about trash in Queens. With that being said, we welcome Nicholas.
Thank you, Borough President. I have a presentation here. I'm going to just share my screen real quick. All right. So I'll go through this brief presentation. It's a quick overview of the new rule that went into effect on April 1st for building owners of 150 plus units, building developers to submit to us a waste management plan, what that actually means, what that entails. It is in its infancy. We've only had one plan submitted so far. There's about 150 projects currently out there, 20 or so in the borough of Queens that fit underneath this rule, but obviously anything new that is developed in the future will have to submit a waste management plan if it fits in the criteria. So let me just,
Nick, are you able to make that full screen?
hold on 1 second. I want to get rid of the, I want to get out of this presenter mode. Can you see it, or can you just see this presenter mode screen?
We're seeing presenter mode.
Hold on one sec. Oh, use presented. Yeah. Oh, it's going on my other monitor for some reason. Let me just make one last change, see if I can do this. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why this isn't. It's like showing up on my second monitor for some reason. Okay, one sec. Primary. All right, can you see that?
Perfect.
Okay. So the new rule, previously, if you could believe it or not, there really was no requirement for large buildings to even consider waste management. I know this is something that, especially for the district managers in Manhattan, is a huge problem when you've got these gigantic 800-unit buildings being built. And even in Long Island City, you'll see some of these large buildings, and then all of a sudden, there's like 70 bags of garbage out in front of the building. And when we talk with them, they'll have insufficient indoor storage. They didn't even consider doing compactors in the building, all of this stuff. And it's a huge problem for us. It's something that way back, this rule was actually originally proposed back with Catherine Garcia in March of 2020, but unfortunately the pandemic happened. It kind of got put on the back burner. And now some 2 years later, it's finally coming to fruition. But we all see it everywhere when we go around. You see large mountains, 20, 40, 60 bags impacting the street cleanliness. It's obviously a food source for rodents, huge quality of life issue. So the goal of the rule was to finally get these buildings to submit a plan that considers what they're going to do with the waste generated by their residents. Because really, a lot of people build a new building, they think about it, all the cool amenities, they think about everything, but for some reason, waste gets put at the back burner consistently. So we now have a rule effective April 1st, 2022. You could find, I could share this presentation so everybody can see it, but I'll also bring up the website after the presentation. You could see the new rule, you could read it, and you can also see all of the a more detailed breakdown of the requirements on our webpage. So it essentially requires any new building and certain buildings who have already submitted plans that were not approved prior to April 1st to submit a waste management plan. We've already proactively reached out, thanks to DOB, to all the building owners or all the developers of buildings that did not have their plans submitted before April 1st, and we're actively soliciting their waste management plans for their buildings. So who's covered? So new residential buildings, over 150 residential units. And then there are some, like I mentioned, current folks who have submitted plans for alterations and other things, but were not submitted before, were not approved before April 1st. So we created this flow chart because surprisingly enough, people were asking us, we had a few developers be like, how are we covered? Are we not covered? So if you're not 150 plus unit building, no, you're not covered under this rule. If you are, did you submit design drawings, but were not approved by April 1st, you're covered. If you submit design drawing or design drawings submitted after the rule, obviously you're covered. And then if they were submitted but approved prior to the rule, you're not covered. So you don't have to resubmit a plan if you've already been approved. So this is the information that we're requiring in the waste management plan. So the name and contact, the number of units, the estimated amount of trash that'll be created when you're operating at full capacity. We have a waste calculator that we've put together to assist them. And you'll see later in the slide, we require a consultation with us prior to submitting your waste management plan. We want to work with them to make sure that they understand and also hear our recommendations before they submit their plan. We want to make sure that they're doing it. They have to have storage that exceeds 150% of the expected waste generated internally. A plan to keep recycling separate from trash, obviously, education components for tenants. It's a whole bunch of different requirements for their plan that they have to satisfy. So this is the timeline. So they have to submit their plan within 60 days. The other projects should submit their waste management plan at the same time they submit their design drawings. And then we have 90 days to review their plan. If we reject the plan, we will give them a detailed response as to why we reject their plan. Then they'll have 60 days to submit an amended plan, and we'll have 90 days from that to review and make a final determination. We do require, and we have a link on our website, to schedule a consultation to ensure that your plan is up to snuff and we agree with what your plan that you're submitting. So we will, during the consultation, we'll review the plan with any of the buildings and make sure that it's successful for what they have. Our waste calculator estimates how much like square space, sidewalk space, the estimated amount of trash will take up, how much bags that would generate, how much compacted bags that would generate. And then we always will be recommending to all of these buildings containerization, and then how many containers, if you have a certain amount of people, how many containers would be typically required for a building of that size. Well, I'll show you the waste calculator after this as well. We also offer our Bureau of Recycling and Sustainability offers zero waste training for building managers, best practices. Basically, we'll come into their building, we'll take a look at their whole setup, figure out what's the best way for them to capture the most amount of recyclable material from their residents, and then we'll make those recommendations to them on how to do it. So I just want to quickly go over. So this is our, if you could still, this is our waste management plan website. So you could see it has a little bit more detail than the presentation. Down here, they could schedule the consultation. Anything you need to know about what I was just speaking about on our website. This is the actual rule. You could find.
Nicholas, we can't see what you're saying. We still see the PowerPoint.
Oh, do you?
We're seeing just your phone number and your email.
What about now? Can you see this? Hold on. Am I still sharing the screen?
No.
Okay. 1 second. Let me go back.
There's someone speaking in the background. I don't know if it's at all.
Yeah,
Can you keep it down a little bit?
hold on just 1 second.
Enforcement, like 35 of people in the public.
Okay, can you see this now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is our website. This is the proposed rule. You could get, basically it outlines everything that we outlined in the presentation, just in a little bit more detail. And then I am going to just show you the waste calculator. So this is the waste calculator. So this is what our collections office uses before we meet with them. And they pretty much use it in a lot of other buildings. It uses 3.5 pounds per day per resident in the building. And it'll estimate essentially how much square footage will be taken up, how many pounds of trash it'll generate. And it assumes, it makes a few assumptions, but it's pretty accurate. So say if you have 150, this is a building with like 250 units, right? They would recommend 2 compactors that you would generate essentially 7.96 tons per day from this building. That would be about 265 compacted bags of trash, 47 bags of cardboard, etc. So these are the assumptions they're making in their plan. Now, if a building submits a plan and say they're only estimating that a building of this size will generate like 400 bags of trash or something like that, they'll be able to check in and say, no, actually, our estimation is that you will, based on our waste calculator, generate over 130 more. So they can't just like make up those numbers. And And if they submit a plan that we find to be deficient, we could be able to go back, show them the calculator and show things like that to them so they know what to submit and amend when they submit their final plan. So that's really all I wanted to show. Like I said, it's really in its infancy right now. There's probably a lot of stuff that we're going to be ironing out as we're sort of getting the plans in, reviewing the plans, working with a lot of these new projects. Like I said, there's about 150 projects that are required by this new rule to submit these plans now. And we're starting to get them in. We've contacted every single one. We are going to be speaking with, we've contacted like the Real Estate Board of New York. We are going to do a presentation at AIA, which I forget is I want to say the American Institute of Architects. I think that's AIA.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking to them about it in May. So we're trying to really educate as many people as possible and make sure that they comply with this new rule. So I'm open to any questions, not just about the rule, but anything sanitation related. If anybody has any questions.
Tell me about, so we're doing this for, these are private buildings or also city owned, city stock as well?
Any building over 150 units. Yeah,
So
any building
NYCHA?
over
So
150.
NYCHA.
Mhm.
So NYCHA is gonna have to come up with a plan.
They will have to submit a waste management plan.
What are the penalties if people don't adhere to this plan?
So that is a very interesting question. So so right now, if you look at the proposed rule, there's no, say, enforcement mechanism like we're going to give you $1,000 penalty. The real enforcement mechanism is that we have the right to deny sanitation services to the building. And as you can imagine, these building owners with, say, 300 units generating 15 tons of trash, 3 times a week for collection, that would be thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for them to have to hire a private car to service their building. Essentially, I know buildings like Parkchester in the Bronx. I know when they have sanitation collection and just supplemental collection, maybe 1 day a week. Sometimes that was over. I remember speaking with them about $400,000 to $500,000 a year just for that, based on their tonnage, which would be very similar to a large scale building like this. So it's really in their best interest. While there's no formal mechanism, I don't foresee these buildings not complying with this rule and then having to have private car service because of just these guys want to make money. They're not in the business of developing 200 unit buildings to not make money. So I'm fairly certain, but that is something that we're going to see as we're moving forward with people submitting these plans.
Last question, when is composting coming up? Where are we at on composting?
I would have to speak with BRS on the expansion of where we're at. I know that the expansion was stopped because of the 3% peg that the agency had to do. So the expansion was cut. I know it's still currently in 7 community boards. We're hoping to expand into all the community boards again, but right now I'd have to see where we're at with BRS and see.
Community boards in Queens?
I don't think it's in any community boards in Queens right now. No Queens, Staten Island. Brooklyn 1 and 2.
Really?
Yeah.
I knew that answer. That's why I asked it. It's the lawyer's rule. Ask the question you already know the answer to.
Oh.
So when are we going to see this program instituted back in Queens, at least somewhere?
Listen, we want it in every community board again. It's all just an issue of funding. That's really it. I can speak with BRS and, like I said, see where we're at. They are more in tune to those conversations than I am with OMB and everyone. But right now, to my knowledge, the expansion is on hold until there's some funding.
Let them know I'm not happy. We have nothing in Queens.
Listen, we're not happy either. I know BRS wants it in every community board. We were very devastated when we got everything.
Weren't we the first borough to get it? So how do we not have it at all?
On the new rollout, it was all based on signups. So the community boards that got it so far are the ones that had the most amount of signups. So we're happy to come out and try and get people as many signups as possible. But that was how it was originally rolled out in like its new form, was based on the signups on the website. But I'd be happy to work with your office and we could increase signups. I know there's a lot of council members that want to do events like that in the summer. We could still do compost give backs too. And that's a great way of like doing either a street tree care event or a compost give back, and then trying to get people to sign up there on the spot. We could bring iPads and stuff and get people to sign up.
Okay. All right, we're gonna go to Florence, Debbie, then Marie.
Nicholas, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here. Queens West 1 is doing a phenomenal job. So I have a large number of NYCHA developments in my district, and I have some older, I don't know how to phrase this. You know, they're condos and co-ops and rentals, and it's about 3 city blocks. The piles that you talk about are like Mount Everest, and the number of rats are incessant. Do these types of single-owned structures that have more than 150 units fall into this category because it's not a new owned building? It is multiple buildings owned by one real estate company?
So it wouldn't fall under this rule just because of the fact that unless they are, if you're an existing building and you have no future plans in right now, then technically you wouldn't fall under this rule. So you would have to have been submitting it's an alteration that increases the square footage by I think 110%, or it is modifying a commercial, so newly altered commercial building, having 50% or more of its floor area renovated to be classified as a multiple dwelling building. If you're just a 150 unit building that's existed prior to this rule going in, and you have no plans submitted, then you're not covered by this rule, unfortunately. So anything existing wouldn't be covered unless they, in the future, plan to submit some sort of proposal increasing the square footage or.
And with the NYCHA developments, will the NYCHA, each individual development be submitting a plan, or will the city and state be, and how will that work with NYCHA?
So my understanding is that the individual building would have to submit a plan.
So Astoria Houses would submit their own plan, Queensbridge would submit their own plan.
If you have your, each plan would be for the, each building that is of 150 units. Because if there's multiple buildings in a development, essentially, theoretically, they could all submit the same plan for each building, but it would have to be specified, and because all the buildings might be different. You would have to ensure that there's enough space in each building to meet the internalized space requirement of 150%. If there are a certain amount of residents in one building, and some buildings there's not the same amount, the plan could be different. So it really is building specific. But in terms of NYCHA, I mean, I know there are certainly some difficult locations in Q1. We have, I'm sure Chief Azara and the deputy chiefs have spoken with that. We met with NYCHA regarding everything a million times. We're happy to come back out and see if there's ways we could try and make it better. We always recommend containerization at NYCHA because one, especially during winter events, containerization gets service first. And two, with NYCHA, we essentially give them as much service as they want. We will give them scheduled service, but we say, if you call us before 8 p.m. the night before, we'll come the next day to service your container if it's full. So
Right.
We always try and make those connections and make sure they get the most service. But a lot of times there might not be an ideal location for them to put a container on their property. And then you get a little pushback from the actual NYCHA staff that don't want to move the material to a centralized location as opposed to just placing it curbside. But
Understood. No, Iggy's been phenomenal, as well as our super. We've been very lucky thus far. The only problem we had was during the pandemic with the budget cuts, but
Yeah,
Things are starting to look up. Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Debbie and Marie.
Thank you, Nick, for being here and a great presentation. And you're always a pleasure to work with. Thank you. My question is, what kind of outreach are you doing to new developments we know, but existing co-ops, condos, existing buildings? What kind of outreach are you doing and are you going to do on this new qualification?
So we got a full list from DOB of every single building citywide that falls under this new rule. I think it's 148 buildings and it's about it's either 24 or 25 in Queens. We've reached out to every single building and made sure that they understood the rule, made sure that they know that they have to comply and submit this plan now as part of their design drawings. We have received a few back and we've received a few inquiries. Basically, I feel like we're like loan sharks. We basically have to call these folks and email them a lot over the next few weeks because they've submitted these plans, some of them a few months ago, but they weren't approved before this new requirement came out. So now they're learning about a whole new rule that they have to follow and all these new plans that they have to submit. Some of them, I'm sure are more hesitant than others to submit, but we just basically have to keep following up. And as I mentioned before, we're also working with these trade organizations to make sure that their partners and developers know that they have to comply. We also have good relationships with some of the other big developers. I know we've met with Brookfield Properties on a number of their projects. They are always very proactive with reaching out to us about new buildings, and they are big into the containerization, so they always want to know about looking at their project designs with our collections folks and making sure that they have best practices too. Some are not as good, but some actually proactively reach out to us to try and have better designs. And then obviously if there's buildings down the line, any new ones we're going to speak with, they're required to have consultations with us prior to submitting the plan. And we're not just like going to be like, get their proposal, say no, and that's it. We want to work with them to make sure that they submit their plan. They understand, first off, they understand the value of potential containerization at their sites. And two, they understand the impact of the waste that they're going to generate and understand the scope of it. Because like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these people don't really understand how much garbage a building with 200 units generates until the residents start living there and they start generating the waste. Then they really need to understand, what the staff requirements are, what the storage requirements are, what their potential setup will mean in terms of touch points of garbage. That's another big issue, which is like, they don't realize like when residents bring it to the bottom, then you bring it to a tilt truck, you bring it to this site, they don't think about it fully. So we want to meet with them and flesh it out and make sure that they understand the implications around their waste. So we're going to be speaking with them a lot over these next few months, and I'm sure a lot of new buildings in the future as well, and make sure that sanitation is in the forefront of their mind when they're making these new large developments.
Thank you, Nick. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Marie.
And Nick, from what I understand, it's for new buildings and those doing alteration run applications, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great idea, but I also think that we could probably make this happen to even more buildings, because the thing is, what if the building only has 125? But for those
definitely the goal.
For those that are required to do it, they're not likely to do it unless they have an incentive. So maybe one thing that could be thought of, if they get a certain bonus, it could be like a 200 square foot bonus for them to actually have this, because ideally we would want all buildings, to have a space to keep the garbage so it's not outdoors and we don't have the issues with rats. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that we have anyone here from city planning. I realize that since we've been having these meetings virtually, the other agencies don't show up. when we used to have them in person, there used to be a representative from each agency coming to these meetings. So that way, if something comes up like this one that may have a issue with planning, they will be there and could answer questions. So I hope that they start coming to these borough cabinets, because they're all supposed to be here, but it seems that they're all missing in action.
Certainly the goal is to eventually incorporate as many larger buildings as possible. It's sort of like we had to start somewhere. Originally, when the rule in 2020 was proposed, there was also a requirement of buildings of 300 units or more. This was discussed of requiring containerization in those buildings. It was met with a ton of pushback, as you could imagine, from real estate developers. There was a number of electeds with questions about it. So proposing rules like this is never easy. So we're trying to start somewhere and then eventually build up, show the success with the rule and show the impact, and then eventually try and incorporate as many more buildings as possible. It's very similar to what happened with the new rules around commercial organics. Originally, it was like, I don't know, I'm speaking on a term, I'm not an expert on that, but it was like, the stadiums like Barclays Center, MetLife, like City Field, have to commercially recycle, and then buildings of like 10,000 square feet, restaurants, stuff like that. And now it expanded to include more and more. So I think that is going to be the path that this rule is going to go. It's going to start at 150. And then most likely eventually 125, then 100, because we know buildings with 75 still generate a ton of waste. And even if you have a building of just 50 people, it's prudent to submit a waste management plan. It's like, it really works for any building with any number of, any multiple residents, 5, 10, like the building should have a plan for their waste. It makes a lot of sense. So I think it'll start to expand in the future as it goes along.
And that's why I think giving them an incentive will work. We want something from them, but we can give them a little bit of something, even if it's 100 square feet extra bulk for that building. So then that would be a 10 by 10 room that actually can fit some of the garbage or whatever, or refrigerated garbage, whatever they do. So we give a little, and then we hope to gain a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Ready. Thank you. Going to go to Florence.
Thank you, Borough President. So piggybacking on what Maria is saying, in my district, we have a lot of development going on right now, and we have some very, very large projects in the forefront. I admire Department of Sanitation for all of the outreach they do on social media. I'm constantly forwarding everything that you put, and you have so many projects regarding recycling, whether it's composting or fabric recycling or the new machinery. These new machines that you talk about on social media, are they going to be part of this plan for the fabric recycling and everything, that these big buildings have these on site?
So I don't think that they'll be required as of now to say because we've gotten this question too, like, are they required to have balers for their paper? Are they required to have machines like this for their refuse? We can recommend them, but we can't require them at this point.
Interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns on anything related to sanitation? Are they doing that much of a good job that no one has questions for them on any constituent issues? This can't be.
Queens
No
West
dumping
1
issues.
rocks.
Say it again.
Queens West 1 rocks. They're there whenever we need them.
And that's not because I live there.
Oh, you live there? I didn't know that, Nick.
Yeah, I live right
Bravo.
right off Ditmars.
Bravo.
All right, Debbie, we got one. We may have a complaint somewhere. Go ahead, Debbie.
It's not a complaint, it's a question.
Oh.
Our Court Square alternate side of the street cleaning on 23rd. Do we have an idea? I know you've been going out there on Saturdays here and there, but do we have an idea when that's going to become permanent part of the
Let me reach out to the cleaning office and I'll follow up with you offline.
Okay.
I did not get on that prior to this.
Yeah, Borough President Donovan, this is going on a long time, and they've really been asking, and Sanitation has been doing a good job going out there to 23rd and on Saturday and doing some additional cleanups, but we'd like to get that in a permanent.
Yeah, and I think now that, because I know originally before, a lot of discussions around alternate side parking, either expansion, reduction, any sort of alteration was on pause while the mayor's executive
Correct.
order was out on the pilot. So now that that is going back into effect July 5th, I think we can start to move ahead with stuff like that again. But I'll follow up with cleaning office and see, and get back to you offline.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
No one has complaints. I got two. So one, let's go through Corona Plaza. I really want to figure out a strategy there. And currently, I understand, the street vending situation there, but there also are no dumpsters there. And I wonder, Nick, if there could be some natural synergy here. I know it's unique in sort of addressing the issues there. And then, of course, I have to always highlight the Hollis issue, which you all have worked very closely with Councilmember Natasha Williams on, and very grateful for. But just making sure we continue to have more consistent cleanup there. And of course, Snake Road can use some TLC as well.
And we got the money from Councilmember Brooks Powers for cameras to be put on Snake Road.
Okay,
It was originally sent to DOT. They finally made the amendment to send it to us. We transferred some money from another account to cover that while it gets here so we can order them. And they'll be here before the end of the fiscal.
And what is the policy? Because we tried to purchase cameras too this year, and then I felt like OMB gave us some pushback. So
so my understanding is that because I was on the chains with OMB and they were trying to figure out whether the cameras are capital eligible. And it's essentially because they either have to be $50,000 for the item, or the cameras would have to be $50,000 for like one single site, which essentially like that would have been purchasing 4 cameras where 3 of that, like you wouldn't need 4 for the one site, like for one project. So it was like, it was just essentially it wasn't capital.
We weren't able to proceed with purchasing for that reason.
Yeah, because they're not capital eligible. Yeah.
We got to work on that. And that's just OMB making that, they're making that determination, right?
Yeah, there was a site requirement of $50,000 or a unit requirement, and the cameras are about 15,000. So when we told them the price, they were like, well, that doesn't fit.
Okay, yes.
Because it's like one camera essentially their thought is like one camera per site. Now, if it was like, maybe if there was a site that was like multiple blocks long, like say 99th Avenue, where you were like, oh, well, actually, I'm going to fund 4 cameras for this one site. Does this qualify as one site if it's the same road? I think they accepted
it because we tried to do that.
I don't know if OMB is like, no, it has to be the one you have to put 5 cameras on the same pole for it to do, which is like just ridiculous because the cameras can see the whole thing from one camera. So yeah, we were like trying to figure out. I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm happy to take them. We're happy to get as many cameras as possible." But they basically put the kibosh on that.
Right, Marie.
Yes. Before I go on to my question, that new rule that OMB has really needs to be revisited because it also applies to lamppost. So if you're trying to get lamppost from DOT, it's no longer capital. It is expense. So I really think they really need to revisit that because I can think of Queens, the whole of Queens as one location so that we can get capital funding. So I really think they need to revisit that. My question has to do with the storefronts. What is sanitation doing to ensure that they have private carding? I know they're supposed to have some kind of a posting to show that they actually have private carding. And I think along Hillside Avenue and some other locations, they're not using private carding and they're using our bins to throw away their garbage and putting garbage on the sidewalk. And I just want to make sure that sanitation is checking on them and making sure that they have a private carding service and they actually use those services, because they can have a little post, and
Yeah, so during enforcement routing hours for commercial businesses, they are checking for private card or decals as well. Certainly, it's a lot of businesses. So if you know of any in particular that you suspect there aren't, we're happy to do outreach and check and see. Typically, if they suspect that a private card or decal might not be, I guess, up to date or real, they'll ask them for a receipt, because they are also supposed to, if they don't have the decal, they're supposed to produce a receipt. If they can produce a receipt, then obviously they have private carder. If they can't, then typically we'll be able to suspect that they don't have private carder. One of the things that hopefully, as it gets down the line and gets implemented, which will sort of self-govern this whole issue, because as you know, there's 54 enforcement agents. Supervisors are also tasked with doing enforcement as well, but they're also monitoring the brooms, monitoring collection, monitoring 311 complaints. So they're doing a whole host of other things as well to be checking for private carder decals. But the commercial waste zones coming into effect, hopefully within the next, I want to say 2024 is when it should be citywide implemented. God forbid there's no other setbacks, because COVID was a setback to that already. The carders will be incentivized to make sure that the customers within the zones that they service, because now that they only have a limited zone for service, are all customers of theirs, and making sure that they are paying for their service. So that should be a nice back way of making sure that every business has a private carder. I really think that that will govern itself once that is into effect. But until then, our office, when we conduct outreach, always checks for private carder and any sort of litter conditions that might be there. Enforcement agents do during enforcement routing hours, but if there are any specific locations, strips that you know that you think it's a little iffy, we'll just go door to door and ask them, and then we'll either we'll ask enforcement to do it, or we'll just go out and then send enforcement a list of all the businesses that didn't have decals, and then they'll go and visit them all and make sure that they may have a receipt, or they'll issue them a summons. The issue with the summons, it's not that it's $100 and it's a fix-it ticket. So essentially, if they go out and show them that they do have private card, or later the ticket gets dismissed, or it's the other part of that is we can't issue, so you can't issue that summons every single day because it's a fix-it ticket. So if we issue them a summons and their court date is 20, 30 days from now, we can't issue throughout that whole span. So for them, getting that ticket once in that month is kind of like pay it. If they don't have a private carder, it's cheaper to pay for that ticket than to then get a private carder, which is a whole backwards way of dealing with a whole backwards way of that summons in general. But we're happy to still go out. And again, once the commercial waste zones go into effect, these private carder companies are going to take every customer they can get because they have a limited pool. So I feel like that issue will sort of resolve itself. But
Yeah, well, the way it sounds like there's new legislation that needs to happen there somehow. The other thing that I wanted to ask, once sanitation tags a vehicle that has been abandoned, how long should it take for it to be towed? Because there have been instances where we file complaints, and I'm going to give you my personal experience of filing a complaint about one vehicle, and the thing was tagged. They never removed it because it so happened to be another vehicle that just parked right in front of it to make it so that it's impossible to tow. So is sanitation working with the police department, when that happens? So they're supposed to come and tow this up or whatever. And then there's another vehicle that could be illegally parked or whatever, and they're unable to move that. What happens then? Is there some kind of coordination going on with the police department or something to make it happen, and that the complaint doesn't just drop? And another one, since I'm dealing with that right now on Avon Road, 2 abandoned school buses across the street from a school, PS 178, that is actually, I know that my sanitation guys are going to tag it, but I want to make sure that they remove them. They actually have open doors where a child could just wander in there and God knows, is there some kind of creep hiding in there? What could happen to this kid? So these are the kind of things that, I want to make sure that are being addressed. And I want to make sure that no one in my district, suffer some kind of tragedy or anything with something like that. So that's a top priority for me, and I hope you guys help.
Yeah, so there's a few things there. So when we tow a vehicle that fits derelict criteria, we tag all vehicles. So even ones that don't fit derelict, we tag them for roto, which is a rotational tow, which NYPD then removes. If it's derelict, it means it literally has no value. They do not get a chance to get the car back. We tow it. It's basically like a jalopy, like a total POS. We'll take it. The issue we find mainly is twofold. One, when we tag the vehicle, if an owner claims it, we can't touch it to tow it. And if they move it, we can't touch it to tow it. Even if it's like across the street, two spots up, if they move it anywhere in the time. The other thing is if they wipe the tag off, technically we have to re-tag it and start the process again. Now, I know NYPD has limitations. There's been so much towing happening citywide that when you speak with a lot of NYPD officers, there's a lot of capacity issues with removing vehicles. They just don't have anywhere to store them half the time. And a lot of their tow vendors might be either completely booked or it takes them a little bit of time. We do coordinate tag and tow operations with NYPD all the time throughout the city. There was just one, I believe, in Queens Community Board 12, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. If the precinct, all of our supervisors, they know the NCOs at all the precincts. The district superintendents work with the local precincts on a number of different issues in terms of cleanliness and anything that might be homeless related, any interagency overlap. It is hard. I've never heard of an instance like this where somebody blocks the car from being towed. That's sort of a unique scenario. Typically, when there's like a community board request for removal of a vehicle that poses like a safety threat, a lot of times our supervisor will go out, tag it, and then call the NCOs and ask if they can expedite the removal, as opposed to just tagging it, letting it go in the system and letting the process kind of fill its way out. Usually they'll reach out to the NCOs and say, hey, which I know the NYPD was on this thread with us, said, can you expedite this removal? Because they need to coordinate with their tow to go out and take it and go. I'm sure with these buses, it might be a little bit more difficult for them because you need a larger tow than just a regular NYPD tow. But the car blocking the other car, that is something I've never actually encountered. Is the car that's tagged, is it derelict? Is it just like a car without plates? Like, is it?
Yeah, it looks derelict, but I just, I just realized that if I have difficulty doing it, the proper route, just going to 311 and doing things like that on my own, I'm thinking about our residents and, Queens residents, New York City residents, what are they facing when they contact 311 and try to do things on their own as well? Because we do want things to work better for everybody. So that's why I brought that up. I mean, people are getting very bold and very imaginative. Instead of doing the right thing, they find ways to go around and do the wrong things. But with those 2 school buses, that is a top priority. I mean, abandoned school bus with broken windows across the street from a school. I think really something that has to be addressed. And I thank you. I know you're copied, but I brought this up because I know that it also benefits my colleagues. We may have to deal with the same issues. So, but thank you very much, Nick. I know you're on top of this.
Yeah, and any updates I get from our DVO office, I'll make sure to share, because I know, like you said, he's going out to tag it, but I did flag it internally for cleaning operations and our chief Keith Woods of DVO. So usually when I take it for him, he's quick. And he takes it very seriously. So anything that we can do that's within our jurisdiction, I know they'll do, and I know they'll do it. They'll try and do it as fast as they can. So.
And I thank you for taking an interest.
All right, are we finished? No more questions? All righty, well, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our presenters, both Sebastian and Nicholas. Pray everybody stay safe, stay vaxxed, stay safe, follow the rules, adhere to the rules, get tested. And I will see you, God willing, the next Borough Cabinet meeting and before then. With that being said, thank you all for attending and have a good day.